Peter, obviously there are similarities between Obama and Hillary in terms of their background and their general worldview. But there also seem to be some differences of strategy or of temperament. How would you describe the key difference between Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton?
Well, I think for me, the starkest difference is that Barack Obama is primarily about ends. He has certain goals, he has a certain vision for where he wants America to be. Hillary Clinton, I think, is a lot more about means. She has spent her public life trying to build up and craft institutions, create networks, create the scaffolding, as it were, for the enhancement of political power. So Barack Obama is interested in ends. I think Hillary Clinton is interested in means and the exercise of power.
Would it be accurate to say that Obama sees power as a means to get to where he wants to go, whereas for Hillary, power is the end?
I think that's probably true, yes. I think that Barack Obama, in a sense, is kind of the philosopher king. He gives an eloquent speech. He expects that to sort of move the country and for things to happen. Hillary Clinton, I think, has very much a view that in order for things to happen, I need to create the mechanisms of power. And by the way, the more power I have, the more I can get what I want.
In a sense, you're saying that Hillary is a little less ideological than Obama. She wants control, she wants power, she wants money, but she hasn't quite figured out what it's for. It's just for her.
Yeah, I think for Hillary, the end is flexible and the end goal changes. This explains why she changes her views on positions from time to time, and it's really not a difficult thing for her to do because she does have this flexibility. But all along the way, there is this march and this movement to building up an apparatus and an infrastructure of power that's based on power, it's based on money, it's based on influence.
Now let's compare Hillary and Bill for a moment, because both of them, it seems, have this sort of, they're both creatures of large appetites, but their appetites are not the same. And Bill is chameleonic too, as Hillary is. Bill too doesn't seem to have as firmly defined a goal as, say, Obama does. Bill too bends with the wind and is an opportunist in the same manner as Hillary. So what's the difference between Bill and Hillary?
Well, I think that's a great question. And for me, the primary difference here is what they do with the exercise of power. I think when you look at Bill Clinton when he was president, you certainly had the situation with Monica Lewinsky. But when it came to actually governing the use of presidential power, I think that Bill Clinton fit largely within the American tradition. He didn't overstep his bounds to a great deal. When there were issues of sort of trying to overstep bounds or excessive secrecy, like with healthcare reform, it was primarily Hillary that did it. So I view Bill Clinton as an individual who is generally pretty comfortable with the institutions, the way that they are, and the exercise of power. Hillary Clinton, I think, has a much more transformative view and wants to fundamentally change and expand the power of institutions that she happens to be running.
So here we are in the Oval Office. Bill would be perfectly happy to say, I'm here, I've made it. I now have access to all the perks of office. I have access to, I eat well, I live well, I dress well, I've got women, and that circumscribes the limits of his ambitions. What you're saying is that Hillary sees this as a vehicle to take over healthcare and take over the auto industry and take over the financial industry. She wants to be, in a sense, manipulating the levers of power. She wants to control the wealth of America.
Yes, there is what I call the Clinton blur, which occurred while she was Secretary of State. This is, of course, the executive office that she has held. And if you look at when she was running the State Department, there was this blurring of State Department power, the Clinton Foundation, and the commercial interests of the Clintons themselves. They were essentially blurred and merged into one. This is the vision that she has for the exercise of power, because she really doesn't see a distinction or a difference between the use of government state power and the benefits that the Clintons accrue from the exercise of that power.
Now, isn't there a third world aspect to all this? When I was growing up in India, you saw a blurring. You'd have the military trucks, for example, taking voters to the polls and people using government resources to campaign in elections. This kind of very blurred line, as you put it, between personal interests and the organization of government. And are we importing that with Hillary to the United States?
Well, I think that's the great fear. I mean, think about in the developing world the problem that we have with kleptocracies. Governments that are ultimately about the leaders becoming rich. That's what the concern is, that you use government power for self-enrichment for yourself and for the self-enrichment of friends, which of course only enhances your political power and the power of your allies. That is, I think, certainly what Hillary Clinton did at the State Department with the decisions that she made, how she made those decisions, for whose benefit she made those decisions, and the Clintons made a lot of money while she was Secretary of State as a result of it. That is kleptocracy, and that is, I think, the great concern with Hillary Clinton in executive power.
Now, earlier Democrats, I think, for example, of FDR. FDR was wealthy when he came to the White House. The Kennedys, of course, were wealthy when they got here. So they didn't see government as a way to rake it in for themselves. Carter and Obama were not wealthy, but they don't seem to have used government as a form of profiteering. Now, when Hillary keeps saying we didn't have any money, people sometimes scorn that, but there's an element of truth to it. The Clintons have not been wealthy for most of their life. And so this would be another element of their third worldism. You see high office as a way to loot the taxpayer.
Yeah, well, I think that's exactly right. And I think if you look at the trajectory of the Clintons' personal finances, their massive accumulation of wealth, more than $150 million in earnings the first 12 years after Bill Clinton leaves the Oval Office. People forget Hillary Clinton had government power. She was a powerful senator, member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. She then goes on to be Secretary of State. And when you look at the flow of money, the timing of that flow of money, who it's coming from, and decisions that she's making, it's hard not to see this very troubling pattern. That essentially influence and decisions are being bought and sold. And these are decisions, by the way, that are not just about appointing who's going to be the ambassador of Norway. These are decisions about U.S. nuclear policy, about U.S. human rights policy, about very vital decisions that are made by America's chief diplomat when Hillary Clinton was running the State Department.
So it's understood that people who give $100,000 to a presidential campaign get appointed U.S. ambassador to the Bahamas, right? That's part of the patronage of American politics, but this is not that.
No, this is not that. This is something radically different. This is the transformation of decision-making in a way that radically changes the approach that Hillary Clinton had.
It's renting out our foreign policy.
It's renting out our foreign policy, and all you need to do is look at positions that she held, the flow of money to the Clinton Foundation or the Clintons personally through speaking fees, and then Hillary making a 180-degree turn in her previous position.
I want to point out that this is actually ratcheting up and in fact a lot scarier than even traditional patronage, in which you, for example, allocate money to build maybe a bridge that doesn't need to be built or a dam that you're building just to create jobs. This is actually issues involving U.S. national security, but it also involves issues involving America's position in the world, right? America's position as a defender of human rights, or America's position as a helper of the needy, starving people around the world.
That's exactly right. And here's the thing, that what the Clintons have done that's so masterful, Dinesh. Think about this for a second. We have one consensus point in American politics when it comes to money in politics. All the debate about campaign donations, super PACs, everybody agrees we don't want foreign money flowing in to U.S. policies to influence our decision-making process. What have the Clintons done? While Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, the Clintons took tens of millions of dollars that ended up in their pockets and hundreds of millions of dollars that ended up in the Clinton Foundation from foreign entities that could not donate to her campaign, that could not set up a super PAC, but they set up an infrastructure that allows foreign money to flow into her family's pockets at precisely the time she is making decisions that affect those foreign actors. So this is unprecedented in American history. This is not traditional patronage. This is not building a bridge where at least there's a bridge that gets built and some jobs that temporarily get created. This is about rank influence and buying and selling influence by foreign oligarchs and foreign governments. That has not happened in American history before.
It seems to me we also have only touched the tip of the iceberg on this, because when you run your finger down a list of all the entities that are feeding money to the Clintons and their foundations, all kinds of strange things pop up. up, an obscure church in a country in Africa where people don't even have enough food is giving millions, if not tens of millions of dollars to the Clintons, and you know that that can't be a straight-up transaction. The Clintons should be giving money to those entities, but those entities are funding the Clintons, and nobody knows why, and nobody knows what's the story behind it.
Yeah, this is a hugely important point. I mean, when you think of the Clinton Global Initiative and the Clinton Global Foundation, you think of entities that are, of course, operating worldwide. But the flow of funds is primarily not from an insurance company in Great Britain or a media company in Germany. It's coming from, mining companies operating in Congo that cut deals with warlords. It's from places like Nigeria. It's from places in South America that have political cultures that are filled with bribery, that are filled with payoffs, and oftentimes from actors that are in legal trouble, that have been indicted for criminal charges. So we're not talking about, the leading lights of corporations in Japan and Germany. We're talking about the darker fringes of the world where there is rampant corruption and where, by the way, the power of the State Department and the Secretary of State to pick winners and losers is huge and very profitable, and that's what motivated them to give so much money to the Clintons.
I read when Clinton, toward the end of his tenure, gave a series of interviews to the journalist Taylor Branch, and in those interviews he said something to the effect of, I need money, I think I know where to get it,
Right.
and once I get out of office, I'm going to go find it.
Yeah.
In a way, he was being very prophetic and candid about, probably more candid than Hillary would have been, about the next move for the Clintons.
That's right. I mean, he knew in 1999 when he did that interview with Taylor Branch already where he could maximize the profitability for the Clinton family. And it came through speaking fees from connected entities. And look, nobody faults ex-presidents. Every ex-president since Eisenhower has gone out and given speeches. The problem is, never did it happen when that ex-president's wife was a powerful senator and later Secretary of State and could do favors for the people paying speaking fees that, by the way, were often inflated speaking fees.
So now let's focus in on that a little bit. What was the normal fee for Clinton to speak, or how would you compare him to other presidents? If you compare, for example, the kind of fees that George W. Bush got paid after his term of office. 50 grand, 100 grand? What is it normal to pay a president to come to your corporation and give a speech at your annual dinner?
Well, originally for Bill Clinton, it was about $125,000. And that's roughly what George W. Bush got when he left the White House. And that's kind of standard. But something very interesting happens with Bill Clinton, and that is he starts getting these big paydays, these large speaking fees.
How large?
$500,000, $750,000.
To give a single speech.
To give a single speech, sometimes a 20-minute speech. And these are being paid by who and when? Often by interested parties in the third world that want something from his wife, Hillary Clinton, and they usually get it.
Now let's follow this closely, because people say that Hillary Clinton has traveled for millions of miles when she was Secretary of State, and her critics say she was doing nothing. And I think what they mean by she was doing nothing is she was doing nothing for the United States. She wasn't signing any treaties, she wasn't even having a conference. But it wasn't that she was doing nothing. She was meeting people, she was, in a sense, prospecting for where the contacts are that could begin the flow of money. Isn't that right?
Yes. I mean, Hillary Clinton uses the phrase that as Secretary of State, she was engaging in commercial diplomacy. She was helping U.S. corporations be more competitive overseas. I think the commercial diplomacy had a broader definition that also included the commercial benefit of the Clintons. And this is where relationships are enormously important. So, for example, you take a country like Colombia. Hillary Clinton goes and sees the president of Colombia, Uribe. What does the president of Colombia do? Well, among other things, he determines who's going to get very lucrative mining and oil and timber concessions in his country. Well, the Clintons just happen to know people that are in the business of looking for lumber and mineral deposits and exploiting them through mining. So it's natural that Hillary Clinton would go and meet with them, Bill would go and meet with them, and lo and behold, people that were donating to the Clinton Foundation ended up getting these concessions, often very, very lucrative.
Would it be wrong to describe this as a kind of peculiar brand of crony capitalism? Because in a sense, you couldn't deny that the Clintons are being super entrepreneurial and are even working hard, you might say, to figure out how to line their own pockets.
Yeah, there's no question about it. I mean, you got to give them some credit for entrepreneurial spirit here. The ethics of it, of course, are highly questionable and very, very troubling. But what's also interesting about this, Dinesh, is, oftentimes crony capitalism takes place. You have a congressman that goes to bat for some company that's in his district, because he wants them to get a contract with the Pentagon. And that's sort of rank and file crony capitalism. What's so fundamentally interesting about the Clintons is you're largely talking about them going to bat in places like Colombia and Kazakhstan, not for U.S. corporations, for foreign corporations who are willing to pay them a lot more, apparently, than U.S. corporations are. So even the old argument that politicians make when crony capitalism takes place, that, well, this is about creating jobs, I'm helping American corporations be more competitive. The Clintons aren't doing that. They're actually helping foreign companies that sometimes are competing against American firms. So yes, you've got to give them credit for having an entrepreneurial spirit, but it's a cronyism, and it's the use of government power that I think is so troubling here. This is not a free market transaction that's taking place.
It seems to me, reading your book, Clinton Cash, that you outline a kind of three-step maneuver. There are three moves in this dance. Move number one is either Bill or Hillary goes out there as kind of an emissary. Let's say Bill gives a speech, and he gets a big fat payment for it. That's almost a kind of down payment, a goodwill. Yeah. We'll double your honorarium because we're going to be doing other business around here. Step two, that company or that interest wants something. The KGB general, the former KGB general wants something, or the Canadian tycoon wants something. So the next thing is to get that thing either done or to show some movement politically with Hillary as a senator or Hillary as Secretary of State. And then if it is done, and when it is done, the third move is large amounts of cash now begin to flow to the Clinton Library, typically to the Clinton Foundation, and sometimes also to the Democratic Party. Am I right that that's the 1, 2, 3 move that implicates American foreign policy and even American domestic policy in a kind of Clinton heist?
Yes, I think that is the pattern that emerges. Sometimes it's slightly modified, sometimes the favor is done and then the money flows, other times the money flows first, but yes, that is exactly the transaction that occurs. And look, all politicians are transactional, but they tend to have a certain self-regulation, right? They recognize that there's certain boundaries, there's certain things that just shouldn't be for sale. There's just certain lines that you are not going to cross.
Like Kennedy would never have said to the Russians, look, you can leave the missiles in Cuba if you give me $100 million.
Exactly. I mean, there's just certain lines that aren't going to be crossed. And those that do cross those lines, they end up going to jail. The Clintons are very smart lawyers, and they recognize sort of the legal constraints that they under, but they don't have limitations. So the sorts of things that get transacted, the sorts of decisions that are made sort of with this swirl of money around it are really astonishing. And it's hard to think of any other president, certainly in modern American history, that would come even close to considering engaging in transactions with some of these individuals, some of these entities, and transacting something that's as valuable as some of the things that they, I would argue, have sold off.
Now, these guys have been, you might say, small-scale crooks from day one. I mean, they were doing commodities trades, and then they were doing little rackets and while Clinton was governor of Arkansas. Isn't it true that they think that they can get away with it because they have gotten away with it?
I think there is an element of that, and I think there's also a mindset of entitlement, which is common in Washington, D.C., but the Clintons seem to have it in spades, which is this notion that I've done all this for the country or for my state or for my district. I'm sort of entitled to make a little bit of money on the side. I'm going to do good, but I'm going to do well. That, I think, is in a way perhaps a baby boomer phenomenon that sort of grew out of this 60s notion that we are pure and good and all the things that we do are pure and good, so it's okay for us to make money on the side. But again, the appetite and the amounts in which the Clintons are prepared to do is unprecedented, and it's hard to find anything even remotely close.
I mean, people sometimes say that the Clintons are doing some good through the foundation and so on, but When you're collecting hundreds of millions of dollars, let's say to rebuild Haiti after a devastating series of natural disasters, and you build 24 homes, technically you've done some good, but actually this is a rip-off on an unimagined scale. No philanthropy could get away with this kind of stuff. And it seems that the Clintons have, in a sense, drawn on the goodwill of people. That's what makes their thuggery and thievery different. I mean, normally Luca Brasi might put a gun to your head and take your money, but he isn't at the same time pretending to wear a halo, is he?
No, that's right. I mean, it's what we call compassion camouflage. These transactions in places like Haiti. Haiti has this devastating earthquake in January of 2010. The world pays attention, sees the suffering, sees the damage that has occurred. The money floods in. You have a lot of organizations that are doing a lot of work. The Clintons, in a sense, hijack the government initiative to pour large amounts of taxpayer dollars into Haiti. They do it by Hillary Clinton controlling the apparatus at the State Department. Bill Clinton becomes co-head of the International Haitian Relief Commission, and the flow of money is there. And you can look at a few houses that have been built, but the problem is the amount of money. There should have been a whole lot more good that was done. And the question becomes why? Is it just sort of government inefficiency? You know, we always hear about how inefficient the government is. No, it's far more than that. The sorts of projects that Bill Clinton chose in Haiti, the sorts of individuals who are, by the way, Clinton Foundation donors that benefited from those decisions, you can only come to the conclusion that this was a calculated decision on their part to enrich themselves and their friends through the camouflage of Haitian relief.
And for the ordinary guy, you see the Haitian tragedy, you have a tear running down your cheek, and then you forget about it. You move on with life.
Right.
But the Haitians live there, and at least there are Haitians who seem to know that the Clintons have stolen their money.
Yeah, it's remarkable. I mean, there are lawyers in Haiti that are drawing up complaints in Haitian courts where they want to hold the Clintons for accountable. They want the Clintons to come down and to be forced to testify.
Weren't there demonstrations by Haitians outside the Clinton Foundation?
Exactly. I mean, if you talk to Haitians in New York, a lot of them demonstrate outside the Clinton Foundation saying, where did the money go? Where did the money go? There were hundreds of millions of dollars in taxpayer money that flowed into Haiti that were supposed to rebuild roads, build homes, create infrastructure, create commercial opportunities. Those things didn't happen. The one thing that the Clintons did, build a textile factory, they didn't even build in the part of Haiti that was affected by the earthquake. They built it in the north part of the country that was unaffected. And it was largely a factory for the benefit of a handful of Clinton Foundation donors who give to their political causes and who give to the Clinton Foundation.
Well, this points to a very interesting aspect of modern progressivism, because the old progressivism would perhaps have licensed a certain amount of robbing from the rich to give to the poor. This appears to be a case of robbing from the poor to make already rich guys even richer.
Yeah, and it's all cloaked in this notion that we're all trying to do a good thing. So you look at the philanthropists who give to the Clinton Foundation, who have commercial activities in Haiti, and who benefit from decisions that Bill and Hillary made. They will tell you, and they will tell an individual, I did this all because I care for Haiti. And I think they believe it. But what they don't want to explain, what they don't want to talk about, is the commercial benefits that accrued from decisions that were made by the Clintons during the relief that made them far more money than they ever gave to the Haitian relief cause to begin with.
Now, I think this is a good point. Even though the sums given to the Clintons appear to be gargantuan, they are a small fraction of the harvest of profits that the givers make. They might give $100 million, and then they make billions of dollars as the huge inflows of aid come from all kinds of agencies, and they're in control of it.
Yes. And official decisions that can be made by government powers, it's the same way. I mean, if you look at the uranium deal in Kazakhstan, Frank Giustra, in the midst of that deal, after that deal,
Who's Frank Giustra?
Frank Giustra is a Canadian billionaire investor in the mining industry who wanted to do business in Kazakhstan, in Central Asia. Kazakhstan is a unique country. It's run by a dictatorship. It has one of the largest deposits of uranium in the world. And uranium, of course, is the juice of civilian nuclear technology, nuclear weapons, highly important mineral. and Kazakhstan has a massive deposit. Well, Frank Giustra for years wanted to get lucrative uranium concessions in Kazakhstan, couldn't get them. Those decisions are made by the dictator and the government of Kazakhstan. So he flies with Bill Clinton, his friend, into Kazakhstan. Bill Clinton praises Nazarbayev, the dictator of the country, says he has a wonderful human rights record when he does not. Nazarbayev does what? He gives Bill Clinton's friend, Frank Giustra, a lucrative uranium concession. Several weeks later, what does Frank Giustra do? He writes a $31.3 million check to the Clinton Foundation. That's sort of the down payment. Frank Giustra has given more than $100 million to the Clinton Foundation, but on that uranium deal itself, he's estimated to have made more than $300 million easily.
Now, didn't his company either merge or sell to the Russians, so that in a sense Putin and Putin's cronies are now involved in that as well? So we have former KGB generals and so on. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, this shows how the Clinton technique works. So, you know, the Clintons helped Frank Giustra get this lucrative uranium concession in Kazakhstan. It's now part of his company, Uranium One, which is, by the way, a Canadian company, not an American company. And what do? They start buying uranium concessions in the United States, in places like Wyoming and Utah and Texas. And by 2009, somebody looks at this company and says, great uranium concessions in Kazakhstan, half of projected uranium production in the United States. We want to buy this company. The problem is, Dinesh, who wants to buy the company? The Russian government. Rosatom, which is the Russian state atomic nuclear agency. These are the guys that control the nuclear arsenal of the Russian government. Say, we want to buy Frank Giustra's company, Uranium One. That means, however, because it's a critical industry and it involves the Russian government, it needs to be approved by the federal government. Now,
the U.S. federal government has to sign off on it, and Hillary Clinton is the head of the State Department at that time.
That's right. And Hillary Clinton at the same time, by the way, is in charge of the Russian reset. She's in charge of the civilian, so-called A123 civilian nuclear negotiations with the Russian government. She's meeting with Foreign Minister Lavrov regularly to talk about commercial relationships. So she's the point person of our relationships with the Russian government. So
what you're saying is that even though Hillary has said, she says, I didn't know about this Iranian deal going down, but you're saying that makes no sense.
It doesn't make any sense. And here's the other thing that happens. In the run-up to this, 8 other investors in Uranium One, not Frank Giustra, 8 others, including the chairman of the company, suddenly decide, out of the kindness of their heart, now would be an excellent time to write checks to the Clinton Foundation. And you have, with these 9 investors, Frank Giustra and the 8 others, give about $145 million to the Clinton Foundation in the midst of this. The federal government looks at it, the State Department signs off on this deal in addition to other government agencies, and the Russian government takes control of significant uranium deposits in the United States.
Which they control now.
Which they control now. And what's ironic about this, Dinesh, is if you go back and look at 2007, 2008, who is the one beating the drum on foreign governments owning assets in the United States? An individual who denounced the Dubai ports deal. You remember the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Dubai wanted to buy ports in the United States, critical of other similar deals. It was Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton actually put in legislation in 2008 to make it more difficult for foreign governments to buy critical assets in the United States. And yet now, when the Russian government wants to buy uranium assets in the United States, the Hillary Clinton State Department says we have no problem with this deal.
Now, we have a system of government in which the Secretary of State, although powerful, does work for the President of the United States.
Yeah.
The President of the United States has virtually unilateral control over U.S. foreign policy.
Yeah.
This is not something that is on a regular basis managed by the Congress. It's not overseen by the court. The President pretty much calls the shots. If Hillary Clinton becomes president, are we looking at the frightening possibility that our foreign policy will be up for the highest bidder?
Well, here's what we know, Dinesh. We know that Bill Clinton has said he has no intention of stop giving speeches. He has no intention of not taking foreign donations if Hillary becomes president. So we can expect more of the same, but on steroids, because now you have so much more power than you do as Secretary of State. And by the way, it's so important for people to realize, when Barack Obama selected Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State, he put a very specific condition on the Clintons. It was a condition for taking the job. That condition was you have to just simply disclose who is giving you money on an annual basis. The Clinton team actually signed a memorandum of understanding with the Obama team swearing to do this.
And did they do that?
Well, and Hillary Clinton also promised the Senate Foreign Relations Committee under testimony, under oath, that she would do the same thing.
And
They
did she?
did not do that. There are more than 1,000 that we know of, foreign donors that were never disclosed, including, by the way, the chairman of that Russian-owned uranium company, Ian Telfer, who's a multi-million-dollar donor to the Clinton Foundation. Those donations were never disclosed. We found them by going through Canadian tax records. So the most basic requirement that you just simply disclose who's giving you money, so we have an idea who's putting money in your pocket while you're the Secretary of State. They didn't even abide by that agreement. So I can only imagine if Hillary Clinton is president and this apparatus continues to hum along and expands, how bad it's truly going to be.